Hello and welcome to MarketSquare, your go-to show for deep insights into business and economic trends. I'm Olaito Adibayo, and today we are diving into key development across Nigeria. Stay with us as we break it all down. Aliko Dangote is calling on President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to expand the federal government's Nigerian forced import ban policy to include refined petroleum products like petrol and diesel. Now, the idea behind the policy is to prioritize locally made goods over the imported ones, a move that supports self-sufficiency and boosts local industries. But according to Dangote, the continued importation of refined fuel is damaging local refineries. He said that foreign fuel is flooding the market, stifling investment, strengthening the growth of Nigerians' refining capacity, and ultimately undermining the country's energy security. On the surface, this looks like a patriotic push to promote self-reliance, but behind the scenes, many see the makings of a fuel monopoly in the name of nationalism. Independent oil marketers and economic analysts have sounded the alarm. They argue that banning fuel imports too soon would stifle competition and risk giving Dangote too much control over both supply and pricing. Already, there are whispers that petrol prices could rise to 1,500 naira per litre if market diversity shrinks and other players are edged out. Is it wise to place all our hopes in a single supply source? A balance is possible, but only through careful, planned policy decisions. Nigeria can support Dangote's refinery and others like it without banning fuel imports outright. Instead, a smarter path forward is a phased and regulated transition. This means imports should continue temporarily under strict oversight while local refinery capacity scales up and become more reliable. The Dangote refinery, despite its impressive design and 60,000 barrels per day capacity, is still in its early phase. It currently focuses on diesel and aviation fuel, while petrol production has not yet begun in full swing. Cutting off imports now would create supply gaps and risk price volatility. It also assumes that a single facility can meet the entire country's demand without a fail, a risky bet on every economy. Market competition is essential for price stability. If the government bans all imports and places the burden solely on one local player, it strips Nigerians of alternative sources and puts the entire nation at the mercy of one supplier. That is why allowing regulated imports for now while encouraging the development of other modular and private refineries is the way to go. This approach protects local industry without handing over monopoly power and keeps fuel affordable for everyday Nigerians. And let's not forget the importance of strong regulatory oversight. Agencies like the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority must step up to enforce fair pricing, ensure quality standards, and prevent market abuse. With clear rules and transparency, Nigeria can successfully transition to fuel self-sufficiency without turning local investment into unchecked dominance. If properly handled, this approach could support local refinery, stabilize prices, and move the country towards genuine fuel independence without creating a monopoly dressed as patriotism. In another major economic development, Nigeria's National Bureau of Statistics has completed the long overdue rebasing of country's gross domestic product. The base year has now shifted from 2010 to 2019, and the results are eye-opening. In nominal terms, the economy is now valued at 372.82 trillion naira, up from 205.09 trillion naira using the old base. It's important to understand what rebasing actually means. It's not that the economy suddenly got bigger overnight. It's that we are now measuring it with updated tools. Sectors that were underrepresented before, like the real estate, digital services, and part of the informal market, are now being more accurately tracked. That is why the figures looks higher. One of the biggest shifts revealed by this new data is the rise of the real estate sector. For the first time, real estate has overtaken crude oil and natural gas to become Nigeria's third largest contributor to GDP. This tells us that the country's economic backbone is evolving from one built almost entirely on oil to one that is becoming more service-oriented and urban-driven. Still, we must approach this development with caution. Higher GDP figures do not automatically mean improved living conditions. Inflation, unemployment, and sluggish productivity continue to plague the average Nigerians. So while the rebased GDP gives us a clearer picture of the economic size and structure, the real challenge lies in turning that information into actionable policy. In real terms, however, when we adjust for inflation and focus on actual economic growth, the picture becomes clearer. The Nigerian economy grew by 3.13% in the first quarter of 2025 compared to 2.27% in the same period last year. That's a step in the right direction. It tells us that even aside from the rebasing, the economy is genuinely expanding. But this growth, while positive, is not yet transformational, not for the millions of Nigerians struggling with high inflation, low income, and job scarcity. One of the most significant findings from the rebasing exercise is the rise of the real estate sector, which has now overtaken crude oil and natural gas to become the third largest contributor to GDP. That's a big shift, and it reflects how Nigerians' economy is revolving. We are seeing a growing influence of services, urban development, and informal property transactions. This signals a gradual move away from the country's long-standing overdependence on oil. The economy is becoming more service-oriented and city-driven. But this also raises important questions. If real estate is now such a big part of the economy, why are so many Nigerians still struggling to afford decent housing? Why does a city like Lagos have such high rent rates when sectors contribute so much to GDP? This data should be a wake-up call. It's a time for government and private sector players to invest more aggressively in affordable housing, construction skills, and urban infrastructure. Real estate must not only drive numbers, it must drive development. Beyond real estate, this rebased data also shows that the informal sector is larger than we previously thought. If a huge portion of Nigerians' economic activities happen outside the informal sector, then we must work harder to support small businesses, register informal enterprises, expand access to credit, and widen the tax base. These businesses are not just surviving, they are powering much of the country. It's time to bring them into the fold with policies that encourage growth and not regulation. This rebasing tells us that Nigerians' economic is bigger, more diverse, and more urbanized than our old data showed. It also tells us that the size is not the same as strength. We now have a clearer map of the economy, but the journey ahead still requires bold policy choice. If this new data is to make a clearer difference in people's life, it must guide smarter budgeting, targeted income, and inclusive economic planning. While the rebased GDP reveals how the economy is evolving, the federal government is banking on infrastructure to drive inclusive growth. The federal government is trying to turn policy into impact with its Renew Hope social housing program and an ambition plan to create over 2 million jobs while delivering 77,400 new housing units across the country. The strategy is straightforward: build 100 homes in each of the Nigerian 774 local government areas, and in doing so, ignite job creation across the board, from masons and electricians to suppliers and transport workers. According to Housing Minister Ahmed Musa Dangiwa, funding will come from the Renewed Hope Infrastructure Development Fund, and construction is already underway in locations like Kano, Lagos, and Abuja. This sounds like a win-win homes for the vulnerable. This sounds like a win-win. Homes for the vulnerable and just for the unemployed. A major concern is the affordability of these homes. While the program is social in name, some units, especially those built through public-private partnerships, are priced between 50 million naira to 22 million naira, making them unaffordable for the low-income earners they are meant to serve. To tackle this, the government is working a national social housing fund aimed at supporting rent-to-own schemes and soft mortgage terms, and even free allocations for internally displaced persons and other vulnerable groups. However, for this program to truly succeed, several things must align. Local procurement and workforce inclusion should be non-negotiable. If you're creating jobs, they must benefit communities where these homes are built. Funding must be consistent, not sporadic. Any delay in contractor payment or material supply could stall progress. Transparency in project execution is critical. Nigerians need to see where funds go and who benefits. If well implemented, this housing plan could become a cornerstone of inclusive growth, stimulating the economy from the grassroots while addressing the chronic housing deficit. Nigerians' revenue from exchange rate gains dropped sharply by 73% in the first quarter of 2025, plunging to 589.45 billion naira from 2.199 trillion naira recorded during the same period in 2024. This marks a fundamental shift in the country's fiscal landscape as average opportunities driven by exchange rate differentials all but disappeared, signaling the government's deeper alignment with market-based exchange rate assumptions. The data obtained from the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee showed that a revenue stream once responsible for nearly a third of public distributions in the early 2024 has dwindled to a marginal contributor. That's it for today on MarketSquare. Thank you for joining me. See you on the next one.